The Galactic Empire had conquered hundreds of worlds, its fleets stretching across the stars like an unbreakable chain. For centuries, it had subjugated civilizations, absorbed their resources, and assimilated their knowledge. When Imperial scouts first encountered humanity, the decision was immediate. Earth would fall. It was inevitable. It was only a question of how much resistance the new species could muster before it was crushed. Admiral Keldrath of the Imperial Dominion Fleet stood aboard the bridge of his flagship, the verdict of ascension, observing the blue-green orb that was Earth. The readings were unimpressive. No warp-capable vessels. No orbital defenses beyond primitive satellites. A few scattered stations, clearly meant for research rather than warfare. Pathetic. He had seen more sophisticated defenses on pre-spaceflight civilizations. Beside him, Commodore Valek examined the reports. They call themselves humans. Carbon-based, bipedal, average lifespan just over a century. Their technology is crude, their weaponry primitive. Their military is divided among numerous factions, and their space forces are laughable. They have no unified planetary defense. He smirked. It's almost disappointing. Keldrath's mandibles twitched in amusement. We give them a single chance to surrender. If they refuse, we cleanse their world and take what remains. He turned to his communication officer. Send the transmission. Moments later, a message was broadcast across all human communication channels. The Empire's ultimatum was simple: submit to Imperial rule or be annihilated. There was no room for negotiation. There never was. The response arrived faster than expected. A live transmission from the human leadership. A tall, dark-skinned man stood at the center of the feed, his uniform adorned with no unnecessary ornamentation, his expression unreadable. His name was General Elias Carter, Supreme Commander of Earth's Defense Coalition. His voice was steady, betraying no fear. This is General Carter of Earth. The answer is no. Valek's amusement faded. They're rejecting the offer? Carter continued, as if he had heard the Commodore. We have studied your history, your methods. You believe us weak because we are divided. You believe us helpless because we do not yet travel between the stars. But you have made a mistake. You assume this means we do not know how to fight. Keldrath narrowed his eyes, scrutinizing the man. He had seen countless species cower in fear, beg for mercy, try to negotiate their survival. He had seen defiance before, but this was different. There was no bravado, no desperation, just quiet certainty. Carter leaned forward slightly. If you come, we will not surrender. If you attack, we will fight you in space, in the skies, on the ground, in the oceans. We will fight you in ways you do not expect, with weapons you do not yet understand. And in time, you will regret ever thinking we were weak. The transmission cut. Silence hung over the bridge. Valek exhaled sharply. Foolishness. Keldrath nodded, though something about the exchange unsettled him. The general had not blustered. He had not pleaded. He had spoken as if he already knew the outcome. Prepare the fleet, the admiral ordered. We make an example of them. Miles beneath the surface of Earth, in a secure command bunker, Carter sat back in his chair, exhaling slowly. Around him, the room buzzed with controlled urgency. Officers analyzing data, engineers running final simulations, tactical teams preparing contingencies. A voice crackled over the comms. Do you think they bought it? Carter allowed himself the smallest of smiles. They bought exactly what we wanted them to. He turned to Dr. Evelyn Rao, one of the chief minds behind Earth's technological development. She stood beside a holographic display showing orbital simulations, her sharp eyes gleaming with restrained excitement. They assume we're an easy target, she said. They think our lack of warp drives means we don't understand advanced warfare. They have no idea what we've been preparing. Carter nodded. Let them believe they are the hunters. The longer they underestimate us, the better. Rao tapped the display, bringing up schematics of defensive platforms hidden across the solar system. Automated drone fleets lay dormant, waiting. Stealth ships drifted undetected in the dark. Cyber warfare protocols had already infiltrated the Empire's communication network, feeding them carefully crafted misinformation. Earth had been watching the stars for a long time. When the first signals of an interstellar civilization had been detected decades ago, humanity had understood what it meant. The galaxy was not empty, and it was not kind. They had prepared in secret, building technologies in the shadows, creating weapons designed for an enemy that had not yet come. And now, the enemy was here. Carter stood, his gaze sweeping across the room. They think they've already won. Let's make sure they never forget how wrong they were. Aboard the Verdict of Ascension, the Imperial fleet surged forward, engines flaring as they moved into position. The invasion was beginning. Keldrath watched Earth grow larger on the view screen. He pushed aside the vague unease Carter's words had left in him. It did not matter. The Empire had crushed stronger foes. This was nothing more than another conquest, another victory. And yet, as the first ships moved into range, he could not shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. The void of space trembled as the Imperial fleet advanced, a wall of metallic behemoths descending upon the Sol system with precision honed over centuries of conquest. The Verdict of Ascension led the charge, flanked by warships so vast they blotted out the stars. Admiral Keldrath stood at the command deck, his black eyes scanning the tactical displays. Earth's defenses remained silent. No war fleets mobilized to meet them. No planetary shields flared to life. Just a single, unarmed relay station broadcasting a final transmission. General Carter's voice echoed through the bridge. Last chance. Turn back. Keldrath exhaled through his mandibles. This was pathetic. They had given the humans too much credit. With a flick of his clawed hand, he gave the order. Commence bombardment. Orbital strike platforms unfolded from the hulls of the warships, their cannons aligning with mathematical precision. Lances of searing plasma and hypersonic projectiles ripped through Earth's upper atmosphere, targeted at military installations, communication hubs, and power grids. Explosions bloomed across the planet's surface. Satellite networks disintegrated in seconds. The Empire's victory was already taking shape. And then, something changed. A ripple spread through the fleet's formation. Subtle at first, a flickering of system readouts, an unexpected delay in weapon recalibrations. The tactical display stuttered, glitching for a fraction of a second. Keldrath frowned. Report. A junior officer hesitated. Minor disruptions in the command uplink, Admiral. Nothing significant, yet Keldrath's instincts prickled. He turned to Commodore Valek. Deploy ground forces. I want this world under our control by nightfall. Dropships launched, descending like a steel rainstorm. Squads of Imperial soldiers, clad in carapace armor and wielding plasma rifles, landed in key locations, major cities, industrial centers, military bases. But the moment they hit the ground, the battle changed. From the ruined streets, from the shattered buildings, humanity struck back. The first signs of resistance weren't traditional armies marching in formation. They were unseen forces lurking in shadows. Drones moving in synchronized patterns, cloaked figures striking with terrifying precision. Urban centers turned into death traps, as Imperial squads were ambushed by enemy forces who struck fast and vanished before counterfire could land. In New York, an entire battalion disappeared into the depths of the subway tunnels, their last transmissions garbled with confusion and panic. In Tokyo, towering mechs rose from beneath abandoned structures, their weapons tearing through Imperial dropships before vanishing into the skyline. In Moscow, electromagnetic pulses detonated across key landing zones, frying Imperial armor and leaving elite soldiers defenseless against guerrilla counterattacks. On board the Verdict of Ascension, Keldrath watched in disbelief as the casualties ticked upward. The ground forces weren't securing territory. They were being hunted. This isn't possible, Valek muttered. Their technology is primitive. Keldrath's mandibles tightened. We were wrong. Beneath the war-torn surface of Earth, in a hidden command center buried deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, General Carter surveyed the unfolding chaos with measured satisfaction. "They're adjusting," Dr. Evelyn Rao noted, arms crossed as she analyzed the incoming data. "They're realizing brute force isn't working." Carter nodded. "That's the point. Humanity had known from the beginning that it could not outmatch the Empire in raw firepower. But war was never just about firepower. It was about adaptation, about exploiting weaknesses others didn't see. The Empire fought with rigid doctrine, each conquest executed with the same brutal efficiency. They expected battles to follow patterns, overwhelm defenses, crush resistance, instill terror. But Earth had spent decades studying their methods. And where the Empire relied on overwhelming force, humanity used unpredictability. "This is where it begins," Carter murmured. "They think this is resistance. They don't realize this is a trap." On the streets of Berlin, Sergeant Lucas Hayes crouched behind the ruins of a collapsed overpass, his rifle steady as he surveyed the enemy patrol below. 6 Imperial soldiers moved in formation, their armor gleaming under the fire-lit sky. Advanced, heavily armed, nearly impervious to small arms fire. But not to what came next. Hayes tapped his earpiece. Ghost team in position. A moment later, a lone drone hovered into view, a small, insect-like machine barely the size of a fist. It darted toward the squad, and for a heartbeat, the soldiers hesitated. Then the drone detonated. A pulse of energy rippled outward, scrambling every electronic system in the blast radius. The soldiers staggered, their HUDs flickering into static. And in that instant, Ghost Team struck. Gunfire erupted from the shadows. Suppressed rounds punched through the weakened armor joints. A knife slid under an unprotected mandible. By the time the last Imperial soldier hit the ground, the squad was already moving. Hayes exhaled. Another successful strike. Another lesson the Empire would learn too late. Aboard the Verdict of Ascension, chaos spread. Reports flooded in, communications failing, targeting systems misaligning, entire squadrons vanishing. Even their warships, once thought untouchable, faced an unexpected enemy. The humans had unleashed cyber warfare unlike anything the Empire had encountered. Virus-laced transmissions hijacked automated targeting systems, turning Imperial weapons against their own fleet. AI-driven infiltrators embedded within the Empire's code had lain dormant, waiting for this exact moment to awaken. "We're losing control," a tactical officer shouted. "Entire sectors are compromised." Keldraff clenched his fists. This wasn't a battle. It was an unraveling. The humans had not simply prepared for invasion. They had prepared for this invasion. The realization hit like a thunderclap. "They lured us in," he growled. "They wanted us to attack first." Valek's eyes widened as the implications settled in. "Admiral, we need to." A tremor rocked the Verdict of Ascension. A deep, bone-rattling explosion from within the ship. Alarms blared. Internal systems flickered. Keldraff whirled toward the displays, his blood running cold. The humans weren't just fighting back. They were winning. The Imperial fleet had come to crush a primitive world. Instead, they found themselves ensnared in a conflict they did not understand, against an enemy that refused to fight by any rules they recognized. Every hour, another warship faltered, another battalion was cut off, another system was lost to an invisible force that struck from the shadows and disappeared before retaliation could land. This was not conquest. This was survival warfare, and humanity had spent its entire history perfecting it. Deep beneath Earth's surface, in a command center carved into the bedrock, General Elias Carter stood before a massive tactical display, the holographic battlefield shifting in real time. The Empire's formations had fractured, their ships adjusting erratically as they attempted to counter an enemy that never fought the same way twice. "Status?" Carter asked, Dr. Evelyn Rao pushed a strand of dark hair behind her ear as she zoomed in on a sector near Mars. Phase 2 is in motion. Our teams have infiltrated their supply convoys. Automated defense platforms are picking off stragglers. We've disrupted their long-range communications. Right now, their fleet is flying half-blind. She exhaled. They still have overwhelming numbers, but they're not fighting like a single entity anymore. They're panicking. Carter studied the battlefield. The Empire had believed its strength lay in its size, its discipline, its ability to crush opposition through sheer force. But humanity had studied them carefully, and they had found the flaw buried deep in the Imperial psyche. The Empire was a machine, efficient, powerful, and inflexible. And machines broke when they were pushed beyond their design. A new transmission flickered onto the display. A familiar face, gaunt with tension. Sergeant Lucas Hayes. Ghost team is in position, Hayes reported. His voice was steady, but Carter could hear the exhaustion beneath it. We've infiltrated one of their command outposts. Uploading data now. Rao tapped the controls, and a flood of information poured into the system. Troop movements, fleet vulnerabilities, the structural layout of the verdict of ascension itself. Carter felt the weight of it settle on his shoulders. You got inside their network. Hayes allowed himself a small, grim smile. Not just their network. We got inside their minds. The transmission cut out, and Carter turned to Rao. We have everything we need. She nodded. Then it's time. In the orbit of Jupiter, hidden among the icy debris of its outer rings, a fleet of human warships lay in wait. Unlike the towering dreadnoughts of the Empire, these vessels were sleek and silent, their hulls designed for evasion rather than brute force. They had no grand banners, no imposing insignias, just cold, predatory intent. Aboard the lead ship, Captain Mira Vasquez adjusted the targeting parameters, her fingers gliding over the controls with practiced precision. Her crew worked in disciplined silence, awaiting the signal. It came in the form of a single-coded transmission. Execute. Vasquez leaned forward, her pulse steady. Weapons free. The first barrage struck before the Empire even knew they were there. Stealth missiles, coated in reflective alloys, wove through the debris field and found their marks. Engines, weapons arrays, critical infrastructure. Entire Imperial cruisers erupted in silent bursts of flame, their hulls shattering under the force of a technology the Empire had deemed impossible for such a primitive species to possess. By the time the Imperials detected them, Vasquez's fleet was already moving, disappearing back into the void. The Empire had expected a war of conquest. What they had gotten was a ghost war, an enemy that struck without warning and never gave them a chance to retaliate. Aboard the verdict of ascension, Admiral Keldrath watched in horror as another fleet sector collapsed. He had fought in hundreds of campaigns, had crushed worlds beneath the Empire's boot, but he had never seen an enemy fight like this. They didn't stand their ground. They didn't engage in direct conflict. They made every battle a war of attrition, every engagement a death by 1,000 cuts. And worst of all, they had gotten inside. His tactical display flickered. Fleet formations shifted without his command. He turned sharply to his communications officer. What is happening? The officer's mandibles clicked in barely restrained panic. Sir, someone is overriding our systems. Keldrath is blood-chilled. Impossible. And yet it was happening. The displays around him began to distort, and then, without warning, a new voice crackled through the bridge's speakers. Not one of his officers. Not one of his commanders. A human voice. General Carter. Admiral Keldrath. Carter's voice was calm, almost conversational. By now, you realize that your fleet is compromised. Your communications are no longer secure. Your supply lines are cut. Your ground forces are being picked apart. Your empire sent you here to break us. A pause. But we are not the ones breaking. Keldrath's claws tightened. You think this battle is over? Carter's voice was steady. It was over the moment you underestimated us. The transmission cut. A silence heavier than gravity settled over the bridge. Then, without warning, the verdict of ascension trembled. A cascade of explosions erupted along its lower decks. Emergency sirens blared. Damage reports flooded in. Keldrath turned to Valek, his throat tightening with the first true tendrils of fear he had felt in decades. There inside the ship, Valek's face was grim. "We need to fall back." Keldrath's pride rebelled at the thought. The Empire did not retreat. The Empire did not lose. And yet, the reality before him was undeniable. Every plan, every strategy, every assumption they had made about the species had been wrong. "Admiral," Valek pressed, "if we don't leave now, there won't be a fleet left to command." Keldrath's mandibles clenched so tightly they ached. He looked at the chaos around him. The fire spreading through the decks, the terrified faces of his officers, the endless stream of defeat pouring into his ears. With every ounce of restraint, with a decision that burned in his gut, he gave the order. Sound a retreat. The words tasted like ash. And across the battlefield, as the mighty Imperial fleet turned and fled, humanity stood victorious, not just in battle, but in the knowledge that they had done the impossible. They had made the great Galactic Empire run. The Imperial fleet's retreat sent shockwaves through the galaxy. Never before had the Empire fled from a battle, let alone against a species they had deemed insignificant. Their doctrine had no contingency for defeat, no strategy for recovering from humiliation. They had come to shatter humanity's spirit, yet it was their own morale that lay in ruins. Aboard the verdict of ascension, Admiral Keldrath stood in the dim glow of his command deck, watching as the remnants of his once invincible armada limped away from Earth orbit. The damage was catastrophic. Warships that had never known fear were now shattered husks drifting in space. Supply lines had been severed, key command ships lost. The verdict itself bore scars from the conflict, its reinforced hull marred by explosions, entire sections venting into the void. More damning than the physical losses, however, was the erosion of the Empire's absolute certainty. Keldrath had always believed in the inevitability of Imperial victory. Now, for the first time, he doubted. Commodore Valek approached, his posture rigid with barely contained unease. "The Council demands an immediate report. They want to know how a primitive species managed to cripple the fleet." Keldrath's mandibles clicked in frustration. "Tell them the truth. We were not prepared for this war." Valek hesitated. And the next step? Keldrath's gaze remained fixed on the planet below. "We must adapt." But even as he said the words, he knew the truth. The Empire did not adapt. It consumed. It overwhelmed. Against any other species, that had been enough. Against humanity, it had failed. Deep within Earth's subterranean command center, General Elias Carter studied the latest intelligence reports. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. Humanity had proven its resilience, but the Empire would not accept defeat. Not yet. Dr. Evelyn Rao stood beside him, arms crossed, eyes sharp with calculation. "They're retreating, but they're not broken. If they regroup, they'll return with greater force." Carter nodded. "That's why we don't give them the chance." Across the war room, teams of analysts and tacticians worked furiously, piecing together patterns, identifying weaknesses. Every fragment of stolen data was being examined for one purpose: to strike before the Empire could recover. Sergeant Lucas Hayes appeared on a nearby monitor, his armor scratched and scorched from the latest skirmish. Ghost Team just secured another data node. "We've got access to their fleet command protocols." Carter's expression remained unreadable. "Can we use it?" Dr. Rao's fingers danced over her console, her voice measured. "We can do more than use it. We can cripple them." A new schematic filled the display. The Empire's warp network, an intricate system of interstellar gateways, carefully maintained to ensure seamless movement of their fleets. It was their lifeline, allowing them to reinforce any conflict zone in mere hours. And now, thanks to Hayes and his team, Humanity had the keys to disrupt it. Carter exhaled slowly. If we take this down, they'll be stranded, isolated, forced to fight with what they have, instead of what they can summon. Dr. Rao met his gaze. This is our turning point. Humanity had never been content with mere survival. They had been underestimated, backed into a corner, given no choice but to defy extinction. And now, as the first real victories settled into place, the question was no longer whether they could resist the Empire. The question was how far they could push before the Empire broke completely. Aboard the Verdict of Ascension, Keldrath brooded over the reports pouring in. The humans weren't celebrating a desperate survival. They were planning their next move. Valek studied the shifting battle map. They are not waiting for us to return. They intend to take the fight to us. Keldrath's claws curled against the console. Then they are more dangerous than we ever imagined. For the first time in his long career, he felt something unfamiliar at the edges of his mind. Doubt. Humanity had turned the tide. And now, the war had truly begun. The remnants of the Imperial fleet drifted through space. Their once glorious formations shattered beyond recognition. Fires raged in the broken hulls of abandoned warships, while lifeless bodies floated in the void, silent witnesses to the impossible truth. The Galactic Empire, the unchallenged dominator of 1,000 worlds, had been humbled, and the name of its undoing would be spoken in hushed, fearful tones across the stars. Earth. Aboard the Verdict of Ascension, Admiral Keldrath stood motionless at the command deck, gazing at the scattered debris field. The retreat had been necessary, but it had come at a cost. The Empire had lost more than just ships and soldiers. It had lost its aura of invincibility, and in its place, something dangerous had taken root. Fear. Behind him, Commodore Valek's voice was tight with unease. The Council demands an explanation. They do not understand how this happened. Keldrath exhaled slowly. That is because they do not understand the enemy. Valek hesitated. And what do you understand, Admiral? Keldrath turned from the viewport, his black eyes colder than the void. That we did not conquer a lesser species. We awakened a rival. On Earth, the ruins of war still smoldered, but the fires of resistance had been replaced with something greater. Determination. Humanity had stood against annihilation, and not only survived but emerged stronger. Across the planet, the remnants of Imperial technology were being dismantled, studied, repurposed. Engineers worked around the clock to reverse engineer captured Imperial warships, unlocking secrets that had once seemed unattainable. The technological gap that had once threatened Earth's existence was closing. Deep beneath the Rockies, in the heart of the command center that had guided Earth's defense, General Elias Carter watched as his people prepared for what came next. Dr. Evelyn Rao stood beside him, her eyes scanning the latest reports. "We're receiving transmissions from other worlds," she said, voice unreadable. "Planets under Imperial rule. They've heard what happened here." Carter's jaw tightened. "And what are they saying?" She met his gaze. "They're asking if the rumors are true, that the Empire can be beaten." Carter turned to the display before him, where the fractured remains of the Imperial fleet were still being tracked as they fled into the darkness. "They won't stop with questions," he said. "They'll want to fight." Sergeant Lucas Hayes entered the room, his uniform still marked by the battle. He saluted sharply. "Ghost Team just intercepted a high-priority Imperial transmission. Keldrath is pulling forces back from multiple systems. The Empire is consolidating its power." Carter's expression remained unreadable. "They're afraid." Hayes nodded. For the first time in their history, silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. The Empire had come expecting a swift and merciless victory. Instead, they had sown the seeds of their own downfall. The galaxy had seen that the unstoppable could be stopped, that the invincible could bleed, and humanity, once an afterthought in the grand expanse of space, had become something far greater, a spark. The Empire had come to break Earth. Instead, they had ignited a revolution. Carter's gaze swept over the command center, over the people who had fought and bled for a future that had once seemed impossible. His voice, when he spoke, carried not just the weight of survival, but of destiny. The war isn't over. Dr. Rao nodded. No, but it's no longer their war. Carter looked back at the star map, where the Empire's borders stretched across the void. For centuries, they had expanded unchecked, unchallenged. But now, for the first time, there was something at the edges of their dominion, a force they could not crush, a defiance they could not erase. Humanity was no longer fighting to survive. They were rising,